Imagine you're lying on an operating table, right? You're about to undergo a really complex spinal surgery.
Which is already a terrifying thought for most people.
Oh, absolutely terrifying. And a scalpel, or maybe a high-speed drill, is hovering just like millimeters away from your spinal cord.
Yeah, the margin for error there is basically zero.
Exactly. And statistically, in a manual surgery, there's roughly a 1 in 10 chance the surgeon will slightly misplace a piece of hardware. But, and this is what we're getting into today, what if the hands holding that surgical tool weren't human?
Right. What if it's a machine?
Yeah. What if the system operating on you could anticipate a mistake before the human brain even registered the danger? Today, we are jumping into a really comprehensive 2025 review by Jack and Kakwa. It was published in the Journal of Robotic Surgery.
It's a fantastic paper. It synthesizes 25 recent peer-reviewed studies that focus entirely on AI-assisted robotics in healthcare.
Yeah. And whether you're, prepping for a medical career or you're just fascinated by tech, or honestly, if you simply exist in a human body that might one day need a medical repair, this deep dive is for you. We're going to reveal exactly who or what will be holding the scalpel in the very near future.
Because the literature makes it absolutely clear that we are no longer in the conceptual phase with this stuff.
Right, it's not sci-fi anymore.
Exactly. The transition from human manual labor to highly automated, AI-driven surgical environments, it's happening right now. It's an active clinical implementation all across the globe.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think when most people hear the phrase robotic surgery, they picture the systems that have been in hospitals for like the last couple of decades.
Yeah, the classic setup.
Right, where a surgeon sits at a console in the corner of the room, looks through a 3D screen, and uses joysticks to maneuver these mechanical arms over the patient.
But that's not what this 2025 wave of technology is actually doing. We really need to distinguish between that older technology and this new frontier.
So how is it different? I mean, a robot is a robot, right?
Well, not exactly. The older systems, which fall under the umbrella of telemanipulation, were essentially just about extending human physical capability.
Okay, so making the human better.
Right. They gave surgeons high-definition visualization, and they eliminated the natural resting tremor of the human hand. Plus, they allowed for minimally invasive procedures because, a robotic wrist has a much greater range of motion inside a tiny incision than a human wrist does.
So the machine was basically just a very expensive, very precise puppet.
Exactly. The surgeon was still making every single micro movement. It was pure mechanical translation with zero independent intelligence.
But the new wave detailed in this review integrates artificial intelligence to provide semi-autonomous capabilities, right?
It does. The machine is actively analyzing the surgical field and predicting what needs to happen next.
But I really want to understand the mechanics of this, because I get that a robot doesn't have a hand tremor, but a patient is a living, breathing, moving thing.
Yes, the body is dynamic.
Right. So if a patient takes a deep breath and their internal organs shift, how does a blind machine know not to just slice right through an artery?
That brings us to one of the most critical advancements highlighted in the review, specifically from the urea study, neuro-visual adaptive control.
Neuro-visual adaptive control. That sounds intense.
It is. So traditional surgery relies on a human visual feedback loop. The surgeon looks at the tissue, decides to cut, and their brain sends an electrical signal to their hand to move.
Okay, makes sense.
But if the tissue unexpectedly shifts, say a blood vessel pulses or the diaphragm moves with a breath, the surgeon has to visually recognize that shift, process it, and physically stop their hand.
And there's a delay there, right?
Exactly. There is an unavoidable biological delay, usually measured in fractions of a second. Neurovisual adaptive control bypasses that biological limit entirely. It uses AI computer vision models to monitor the tissue at a frame rate far beyond human capability.
Oh, wow. So think of how noise-canceling headphones work, right? They constantly listen to the ambient noise outside and instantly produce the exact opposite sound wave to cancel it out.
That's a really good analogy.
So this AI seems to be doing the exact same thing, but with physical motion. If a patient breathes, causing their kidney to shift like 2 millimeters to the left, the AI calculates that trajectory in real time and instantly moves the robotic scalpel 2 millimeters to the left to match it.
Perfectly matching it, yes. The relative distance between the blade and the tissue never changes.
That is wild.
It's the perfect way to visualize it. The machine is constantly recalculating the physical environment. It basically acts as a physical safeguard.
So the AI dynamically adjusts the robot's kinematics to prevent an unintended slip before the human operator even realizes the tissue moved.
Exactly.
Huh.
The surgeon is still orchestrating the overall procedure, obviously, but the AI is actively participating in the safety of the journey.
It's almost like a highly advanced physical spell check for surgery.
Spell check, yeah, I like that.
Like, spell check doesn't write the essay for you, but it stops you from publishing a typo. This system doesn't independently decide to perform a gallbladder removal, but it physically resists the surgeon's hand if they try to move into a quote-unquote forbidden zone of delicate tissue.
And what's fascinating here is the hard data backing up that level of integration. Across the 25 synthesized studies, using these semi-autonomous systems resulted in a 25% reduction in overall operative time.
Wait, 25% faster.
Yes, and it led to a 30% decrease in intraoperative complications. And overall, surgical precision improved by a massive 40%.
A 40% improvement in precision is staggering. I mean, when you're working millimeters away from the recurrent laryngeal nerve or the aorta, 40% is quite literally the difference between a patient walking out of the hospital or never waking up.
It really is life or death.
To ground these numbers, the review details a study by Sismic and colleagues involving esophagectomies, major surgeries where part or all of the esophagus is removed.
Right, very complex procedures.
Yeah. And they used AI intraoperative video analysis. During the surgery, the AI watches the video feed right alongside the surgeon. But it isn't just looking at shapes, right?
No, it's trained to identify anatomical landmarks using pixel-level color variations that are completely invisible to the human eye.
That's crazy.
The AI can distinguish between a vital nerve and surrounding fascia just by analyzing microcapillary patterns and subtle tissue textures. And then it highlights these structures on the surgeon's screen in real time.
So it's literally a second set of eyes.
A second set of eyes that never blinks, never gets tired, and can literally see beyond the visible light spectrum depending on the sensors used. It identifies errors and anatomical anomalies before the surgeon makes a critical cut.
And the preparation for these surgeries is becoming just as sci-fi as the execution. The review, especially the Ashiac study, dives heavily into the concept of digital twins.
Oh, the digital twins are incredible.
Right. Surgeons are no longer just looking at static MRI or CT scans. They are feeding those scans into software that generates a mathematically perfect 3D virtual replica of your specific internal anatomy.
Yes, and it is a dynamic simulation. The digital twin doesn't just show where your organs are. It models tissue elasticity, blood flow dynamics, and specific vascular branching.
So a surgeon can literally practice your specific surgery on your digital twin multiple times before you're even wheeled into the operating room.
Exactly. They can test different angles of approach, simulate how the tissue will react when retracted, and let the AI predict where complications might arise based on your unique anatomy.
It systematically removes the element of surprise from the operating room.
Completely. Which brings us to a really crucial part of this whole discussion.
Right, because the technology is incredibly impressive on paper, but if it doesn't fundamentally level up the physical experience for the human being lying on the table, it's just an expensive toy.
Exactly. We need to look at how this extreme AI-driven precision physically changes the outcome for the patient.
So how does it...
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we aren't just talking about cool technology. We are talking about preserving human function and long-term quality of life. The review points to urologic oncology, specifically prostatectomies. The prostate is surrounded by a microscopic, incredibly delicate web of cavernous nerves that control urinary continence and sexual function. In manual surgery, even just the slight traction of pulling the tissue to see better can stretch and damage those nerves permanently.
So the AI's precision and the elimination of human tremor allow for superior nerve preservation.
Right. The machine can navigate that microscopic web without applying unnecessary torque to the surrounding tissue.
And the results?
The clinical outcomes show significantly higher rates of patients retaining full continence and function post-surgery.
That's huge.
It is. And we see a similar mechanical advantage in dental implantology.
Oh, really? With teeth?
Yeah. Drilling into the jawbone creates friction, and friction creates heat. If the bone gets too hot during the drilling process, the bone cells die a process called necrosis, which means the titanium implant won't fuse properly.
Yikes. So how does the AI help there?
AI-assisted robotic drills automatically optimize their speed, torque, and irrigation based on real-time bone density feedback, preventing that necrosis. The resulting fit is so mathematically perfect that osseointegration, the bone fusing to the implant, happens faster and more reliably.
That concept of precision reducing overall trauma brings us back to that terrifying spine surgery statistic I mentioned at the start.
Ah, yes, the Zhao study.
Yeah, the review highlights a retrospective trial on thoracolumbar fractures, specifically looking at the placement of pedicle screws. For you listening, a pedicle is a narrow, bony bridge in the vertebra. Driving a screw through it requires moving through dense cortical bone into softer cancellous bone.
Which is incredibly difficult to do manually.
Right, if your angle is off by just a few degrees, the screw breaches the bone and enters the spinal canal. You risk catastrophic nerve damage, chronic pain, or paralysis. It is literally one of the highest stakes maneuvers in orthopedic surgery.
And the data from this trial showed that in traditional manual surgeries, the error rate for pedicle screw misplacement was 10.3%.
10.3%, that's 1 in 10.
It's high. But with AI-assisted robotics mapping the exact trajectory and physically guiding the drill, that error rate plummeted to 2.5%.
Wow.
That isn't just an incremental improvement, it is a fundamental paradigm shift in surgical safety.
And we are seeing similarly transformative results in pediatric surgery, right, according to the Esposito study.
Yes. Tracking over 100 pediatric robotic-assisted cases revealed that children are experiencing significantly less pain, having minimal scarring, and going home in just 3 to 4 days.
Because children's bodies are far smaller, meaning the margin for error is exponentially tighter.
Exactly. The AI allows the surgeon to operate with a lightness and accuracy that human hands simply cannot sustain over hours of microsurgery.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, though.
Let's hear it.
If the machine is doing all the heavy lifting, if large vision models are automatically identifying the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and the neuro-visual control is actively preventing the scalpel from slipping, and the drill is stopping itself from overheating the bone, aren't we just de-skilling our doctors?
That is a very common concern.
I mean, if the hospital loses power or a system glitches mid-surgery, do we suddenly have a room full of surgeons who have forgotten how to operate without a computer holding their hand? Are we breeding a generation of button pushers?
It's a valid question, and that debate is highly active within the medical community right now. However, the literature suggests a different psychological and physiological reality entirely.
Okay, what does the research say?
The research on human-machine interaction in the OR found that rather than making surgeons lazy, the AI is mitigating the severe danger of human cognitive and physical fatigue.
Fatigue is a huge factor, yeah.
Surgery is grueling. A surgeon might be standing under hot lights, intensely focused, for 8 to 10 hours straight. Decision fatigue is a documented medical reality. Microtremors in the hands naturally increase as muscles exhaust.
So by offloading the constant low-level cognitive strain of visually separating a nerve from connective tissue, the AI is preserving the surgeon's mental bandwidth.
Exactly. The AI handles the repetitive, high-precision microtasks. This allows the human surgeon to reserve their mental energy for high-level surgical strategy, complex problem-solving, and managing unexpected anomalies that the AI isn't trained to handle.
So it doesn't replace their expertise. It actively protects it from the degradation of exhaustion.
Exactly.
And this is a big but. There's a massive catch to that 2.5% error rate, and that saved mental bandwidth. Achieving those numbers requires a multi-million-dollar robot.
It does. It's not cheap.
Which means we're no longer just talking about a medical breakthrough. We're talking about an impending crisis in healthcare economics. Slashes in complication rates are incredible. But why isn't every single hospital in the world installing these systems tomorrow?
Well, the economic and logistical hurdles are monumental. We are talking about millions of dollars in upfront capital expenditure just to acquire the robotic system.
Just to get it in the door.
Right. Then you add millions more in recurring costs for mandatory software upgrades, hardware maintenance contracts, and the proprietary single-use surgical instruments that attach to the robotic arms.
But the review does present a deep economic evaluation by Lai and colleagues, introducing the concept of long-term return on investment.
Yes, the ROI is a huge part of the conversation.
The argument is that while the upfront cost is astronomical, the technology is so effective that it creates massive savings on the back end.
Right. They calculate savings of roughly $1,500 per patient just by shortening hospital stays.
Which makes sense. If a patient recovers faster and goes home 3 days earlier, that frees up a hospital bed, it reduces the hours of nursing staff time required and lowers the amount of medication used.
Furthermore, avoiding postoperative complications yields incredible savings. A severe surgical site infection or a misplaced pedicle screw can result in prolonged intensive care stays, secondary corrective surgeries, and massive liability costs.
Yeah, lawsuits are expensive.
The models estimate savings of another $2,000 to $3,000 per surgery simply by doing it perfectly the first time. When a hospital multiplies those savings by hundreds or thousands of surgeries a year, the system eventually pays for itself.
But wait, that math only works with massive volume.
That is the crux of the issue.
Right, because a massive, well-funded urban research hospital has the patient volume to run that robot all day, every day. They might hit that ROI in 3 to 5 years. But what about a smaller rural hospital or a hospital in a developing region?
They simply do not have the patient volume to justify the capital expenditure.
It might take them a decade to see a return, assuming they could even secure the initial funding. Doesn't this guarantee that advanced, perfectly precise healthcare becomes a luxury good entirely dependent on your zip code?
You are identifying the core equity problem outlined in the research, specifically discussed by Ben-Brani and Hogesi. Without intentional government subsidies, adjusted reimbursement models from insurance companies, or large-scale public-private partnerships, we're actively risking a severe widening of the global health equity gap.
That's depressing.
It is. The standard of care will fracture. Wealthy urban centers will offer highly precise, minimally invasive AI surgery, while underfunded regions will be forced to rely on traditional manual techniques with their inherently higher complication rates.
It isn't just the sticker shock of the machine itself. The review dives into hidden costs, specifically the learning curve and operating room idle time.
Right. You can't just drop a multi-million-dollar AI system into a hospital and expect the error rates to magically plummet the next morning.
The surgical staff must undergo extensive training. If a surgical team isn't perfectly synchronized with the new technology, operative times initially increase, right?
Yes. They are fumbling with the interfaces, troubleshooting software glitches, and adjusting to the lack of traditional haptic feedback, the physical feeling of the tissue, because they are now relying entirely on the AI's visual cues.
So during that learning curve, the hospital is actually bleeding money in wasted operating room time.
Exactly. And there's also the barrier of social acceptance. If patients do not trust an AI-driven robot to operate on them, they simply will not consent to the procedure, and the hospital's massive investment just sits idle in the corner of the room.
So what does this all mean when things inevitably go wrong? Because we have a highly volatile situation here.
We do.
The technology is incredibly capable, but astronomically expensive. Access is becoming unequal, and the machines themselves are operating with increasing levels of autonomy. When a semi-autonomous system glitches in the middle of a procedure, we stumble into a very thorny legal and technical gray area.
The literature, particularly the systematic review by Hall-Tofterheide, dives deep into this shifting responsibility dilemma. It is one of the most pressing hurdles to widespread adoption.
Let me pose the nightmare scenario.
Okay.
You have an AI-driven robotic arm utilizing neuro-visual adaptive control. It is explicitly designed to make semi-autonomous physical adjustments to prevent errors based on its real-time processing of the surgical field.
Right.
What happens if the computer vision model misinterprets a visual signal? Perhaps a rare anatomical variation or a strange reflection from a surgical light, and it makes an autonomous adjustment that severs a vital artery. Who gets sued?
That is the million-dollar question.
Is it the human surgeon who was standing in the room but didn't physically initiate the movement? Is it the hospital administrators who purchased the machine? Or is it the software developer who coded the vision model sitting in a tech hub thousands of miles away?
This raises an important question, and the current reality is that legal and regulatory frameworks simply do not know the answer.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Global regulatory agencies, including the FDA, have historically treated medical software as a static medical device, like a pacemaker or a traditional scalpel.
But an AI isn't static.
Exactly. An autonomous AI that continuously learns and adapts its own algorithms breaks that traditional mold entirely. The technology is advancing significantly faster than the law. We are currently facing severe regulatory fragmentation, where different countries and even different states apply entirely different liability laws for AI in medicine.
So there's no unified global standard for validating the safety of these dynamically changing systems.
None.
It is the definition of building the airplane while we are flying it. And it gets even more complicated when you look closely at the data actually powering these AI models. Because the AI is only as smart as the data it was trained on.
Yes. Machine learning models require vast amounts of annotated surgical video to learn what normal anatomy looks like versus what an anomaly looks like. This process is called training the model. However, if those models are trained on highly specific, homogeneous populations, for example, if the vast majority of the training data comes from primarily wealthy urban research hospitals in one specific part of the world, the AI naturally optimizes for that specific demographic's physical characteristics.
The technical term is overfitting the data.
So
Yes.
exactly.
So if a patient from a completely different demographic background has a slight, perfectly natural anatomical variation, say a minor difference in pelvic shape, or the exact location where an artery branches off, the AI might not recognize it.
That's the fear. Because that variation wasn't represented in its training data, the AI might misclassify a crucial vein as simple connective tissue.
It is a massive technical vulnerability that leads to unequal and potentially dangerous treatment outcomes.
And solving that limitation requires a massive, coordinated global effort to create diverse, standardized, and highly annotated data sets. Gathering that data is incredibly expensive and logistically difficult, particularly when you have to rigorously strip all identifying information to protect patient privacy laws.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive into these 25 incredible studies synthesized by Jack-On Kakwa. To summarize this massive paradigm shift, the operating room is fundamentally transforming.
It really is.
We're moving away from an era of human hands wielding mechanical tools and entering an era of intelligent machines collaborating dynamically with surgeons. These AI-driven systems are mapping our internal geometry with digital twins. They're physically swerving to avoid cutting the wrong tissue and drastically cutting operative times.
They are slashing complication rates by 30%, improving precision by 40%, and getting patients home to their lives faster.
But that reality is only guaranteed provided we can figure out how to pay for them equitably, train medical staff to work seamlessly alongside them, and clearly define the legal boundaries of who is responsible when a semi-autonomous machine makes a fatal error.
It is a future filled with immense clinical promise, but it requires careful, deliberate navigation of the economic realities and technical limitations we've discussed today.
Before you go, I want to leave you with one final thought, building on the digital twin concept we explored earlier. We discussed how hospitals are creating mathematically perfect, highly simulated virtual replicas of your internal anatomy to rehearse your surgery.
Which is an amazing safety feature that removes the element of surprise.
It is. But what happens to that digital twin after you go home and heal? You've just allowed a massive medical institution to create the ultimate, highly sensitive biometric blueprint of your internal organs. Who ultimately owns that data? Your heart's exact dimensions, the specific layout of your vascular network, the density of your bones. What else could that flawless blueprint be used for in a purely digital future, by insurance companies or biotech firms? Something to chew on next time you sign a dense, multi-page medical consent form.
Definitely something to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the research. Stay curious, and we will catch you next time.